There are two cases that I'll be discussing in this video. The first one involves a man named Mr. Jagger, who, as we'll see, violated Rule 1.1. And so I'd like to start with the facts of the case, and they are as follows. We have three characters in this case: the accused, Mr. Jagger, and Mr. Fan and Miss Yang. Now, originally, at the beginning, Miss Yang um, had participated in a proceeding against Mr. Fan that involved the Family Abuse Prevention Act. And as a result of this original proceeding between Miss Yang and Mr. Fan, a restraining order had been issued between the two parties involved. As a result of this proceeding, Mr. Mr. Fan was put in jail on a criminal charge. And as a result, the accused, as it says here, the accused, Mr. Jagger, had become now the attorney of Mr. Fan to represent him in these matters. And so here's where we're at. We have Miss Yang, who had gotten a restraining order against Mr. Fan. As a result of this proceeding, Mr. Fan is now in jail, and Mr. Jagger is the attorney of Mr. Fan. Now, one day while Mr. Fan is in jail, Mr. Jagger is in his office, and he contacts Miss Yang and asks her to come down to his office to meet with him. What they're meeting about, I have no idea. It's not stated here what their topic of the meeting was, but it just seems a little bit skeptical here. Why is, Mr. Jagger is representing Mr. Fan, I guess you would say, the opponent of Miss Yang. And so why is Mr. Jagger arranging a meeting with Miss Yang when he's representing Miss Yang's opponent, Mr. Fan? It doesn't seem right. It just seems fishy. And so we see here that when Miss Yang comes to meet with Mr. Jagger in his office, she finds that Mr. Jagger is on the phone talking to Mr. Fan. And once this comes to light, Mr. Jagger, it seems like he starts to encourage, he starts to advise Miss Yang to take the phone and talk through the matters with Mr. Fan. He's basically encouraging these two parties to talk over the phone, which, if we can think back to previous information, they have a restraining order against each other. By talking on the phone, this would blatantly violate that restraining order, that contract between the two of them that's legally put in place, legally binding at the moment. And so this is the big issue. The fact that Mr. Jagger, the accused, had explicitly encouraged the breaking of this restraining order by allowing Mr. Fan and Miss Yang to talk over the phone. And so we see here, right over here, this area, that Rule 1.1 was violated. So what is Rule 1.1? It deals with competence. And it says right here that in order to portray competent behavior, you have to have the right set of legal knowledge, the right set of skills, show off your thoroughness and your preparation to represent a client. And this all must be reasonably necessary for representation. So what makes something reasonable? If we scroll up here to the glossary of terms, we see right over here that in reasonable conduct, it says it's something that a competent lawyer would do. So if we can just think about this as simple as possible, is a lawyer encouraging the breaking of a restraining order? A lawyer breaking this legally binding contract, does this at all seem reasonable? Does it seem like something that a competent lawyer would do? I mean, the obvious answer is no. It does not seem competent. It does not seem reasonable at all. And I agree with the court's ruling in this case. The fact that Mr. Jagger, the attorney, had given the phone to Miss Yang and said, "Hey, Miss Yang, talk to Mr. Fan. I know you have some restraining order, but just talk to him and figure out your issues. Talk to the guy." I mean, you'd think, oh, there's a restraining order. These two parties must stay apart. By having the two of them talk on the phone, it's just a blatant disregard for ethical conduct, and I can see exactly why he broke Rule 1.1. And so we see throughout the case and throughout all the information here, there's no presence of mitigating factors that would make this just behavior seem worse than it already is. It just seems idiotic of Mr. Jagger to act in this fashion. And we see in the end that the accused, Mr. Jagger, had been suspended as a result from the practice of law for a period of 90 days. And this seems like the right thing to do. He did not act competently, and he just blatantly ignored, any ethical activity by encouraging Miss Yang and Mr. Fan and encouraging them to break their restraining order. We'll go to the next case now, which deals with a man named Mr. David Harrison. And he, as we'll see, violated Rule 2.1. But first, I want to start with the facts of the case so we can get that basis, that foundation laid out for everybody here. Here are the facts. Mr. Harrison was retained by a client who had sustained injuries in a car accident. And we see there's a lot of information here that I have not highlighted because there are more than one rule that Mr. Harrison broke while serving as attorney. But I have the only information that I've highlighted pertains to are facts that pertain to how he broke Rule 2.1. And so we'll see here in this section that I highlighted around here that while representing his client, Mr. Harrison had been informed that the client's physicians did not accurately believe that the injuries were a result of the car accident. And, obviously this seems like immediately like the merits of the case are destroyed. If you are going to your attorney saying, "Hey, I'm in a car accident, I have these injuries, help me out and help me get compensation for my injuries." You think that if you tell your attorney that your doctors don't believe your injuries were caused by a car accident, you think that your attorney would say, "Oh, if your doctors have reason to believe that the car accident did not cause these injuries, your merits of your case are gone." You think the attorney would reveal this information to the client. And we see here that Mr. Harrison withheld this information. He did not say, "Hey, your merits are gone now." He kept on going and failed to inform them of this fact. This is obviously a direct violation of Rule 2.1. So what exactly is that rule, you may ask? Well, here's what it is. It says right here that an attorney shall exercise independent judgment, and right after that, and render candid advice. And this advice does not pertain, as we see here later on in this rule, it does not pertain to just information about the law. It also concerns moral, economic, social, and political factors that are relevant to the case of the client. And if you just think, it's as simple as it sounds to me that candid advice and providing this advice that the merits are destroyed would seem like the ethical thing to do. Maybe Mr. Harrison thought, if I tell my client that their case has no merits, that would be just devastating to the clients. They're betting on me to represent them in this case. I'm their lawyer, I'm their attorney. I have the right to keep them happy and not inform them of anything that is going wrong. And that's just not true. Regardless of whether information is happy news or bad news, You must tell your client candidly, you know, in the most direct terms possible, what's going on. And so once the client said, hey, my doctors believe these injuries are not from the car accident, the right thing for Mr. Harrison to do would be to say, hey, your merits are gone. The clients wouldn't like this. They don't want to hear they have no merits. I mean, nobody wants to hear that. If they have a lawyer, they want to hear you have a case. They don't want to hear you don't have a case. They don't want to hear that. I mean, it's how it works. And so when Mr. Harrison failed to say, hey, you have no merits, when this happened, I mean, it's an obvious violation of Rule 2.1. He did not give them any candid advice. He withheld this bad news because I guess maybe he thought it would make his clients frustrated or disappointed. Regardless of that fact, you cannot withhold this information. You have to be candid. You have to be direct and honest with your clients. Even if the information you're giving them is not going to be good, all happy rainbows, you have to give them every fact of their case. Whether they like it or not, that's out the window. You must give them candid advice. You must give them all of the facts. And so I agree here with the ruling in this case. It is obvious, 100% obvious, that Mr. Harrison violated Rule 2.1 concerning candid advice that an attorney must give his or her clients. And so we see later on here in the facts, right here, yes, he violated Rule 2.1 that concerns exercising independent judgment and rendering candid advice. We see also down here that the respondent, Mr. Harrison, was suspended from the practice of law in the state of South Carolina for 30 days as a result of this rule violation. But that's not all. We saw in the past case with Mr. Jagger that there were no mitigating factors. The opposite is true in the case of Mr. Harrison here. We see, if we scroll down some more, I have it highlighted down here, right here, that the respondent, Mr. Harrison, had previously received 2 reprimands, and besides that, also a letter of caution for misconduct that is unrelated to the current matter at hand. In addition, he had previously been suspended 90 days for failing to pay state income taxes. And obviously, having 2 prior reprimands, receiving a letter of caution about misconduct for not paying your income taxes, I mean, this just makes this case seem even worse. Not only did Mr. Harrison fail to render candid advice to his clients regarding the merits of their case, not only did that happen, he also had previously faced issues and faced punishments regarding his misconduct and prior rule breakings, rule violations. So obviously, it's understandable why the court ruled in this manner, saying, hey, you broke Rule 2.1, you broke this rule, that rule, that rule. He broke a lot of rules in this case. But, I mean, it's clear of what happened, why he had been punished and suspended now for 30 days. It's just how it worked. And so I hope that after hearing the case of Mr. Harrison, hearing the case right here of Mr. Jagger, I hope that you all have a good understanding of both Rule 1.1 and 2.1 respectively. It's one thing to hear about the rules in class and to discuss their definitions, what the rules are comprised of, but it's another thing to hear about how these rules play out in the real world. And so I hope that while this went a little bit longer than you guys would have hoped, I hope that this video provides you all with adequate information to understand the impact of these rules and how they play out in the real world. And that's all I got for today.